As I approached the Carson's house for my first day of babysitting, a frightened little girl ran up to me, saying not to enter because it was where she had been killed. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling as I looked down at her pale, tear-streaked face. "It's haunted," she whispered, glancing nervously at the looming house. "Please don't go in." The Carson's house stood like a grim sentinel at the end of the street, its windows dark and foreboding. The once white paint was peeling, revealing the weather-beaten wood beneath. Tall, unkempt grass surrounded the property, and the old oak tree in the front yard seemed to twist and writhe in the wind like a tortured soul. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest, but I had promised Mrs. Carson that I would be there. Taking a deep breath, I gave the girl a reassuring smile. "I'll be fine," I said, though I wasn't sure if I believed it myself. The front door creaked ominously as I pushed it open, and the musty smell of decay hit me like a wall. Inside the house was even worse. The wallpaper was yellowed and peeling, and the furniture was covered in a thick layer of dust. Shadows danced in the corner, and the air felt heavy with something unseen. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing through the empty hallways. A faint rustling sound came from upstairs, followed by the soft patter of footsteps. My heart raced as I climbed the staircase, each step groaning under my weight. At the top, I found myself facing a long corridor lined with closed doors. The rustling sound grew louder, coming from the room at the end of the hall. "Is anyone there?" I whispered, my hand trembling as I reached for the doorknob. The door swung open to reveal a small, dimly lit bedroom, a child's bedroom. Toys were scattered across the floor, and a single doll sat upright on the bed, its glassy eyes staring blankly at me. The air was cold, and I could see my breath fogging in front of me. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, my back pressed against the wall. The room seemed to close in on me, the shadows growing darker and more oppressive. "Why are you here?" a voice hissed, low and menacing. I looked around but saw no one. My skin prickled with fear as I tried to find the source of the voice. I'm just babysitting," I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. "Leave," the voice demanded. The shadow in the room seemed to pulse with anger. "I can't," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I promised Mrs. Carson." The temperature in the room dropped even further, and I could feel a cold hand brush against my cheek. I gasped, backing away from the touch. "Leave," the voice repeated, more insistent this time. I had to get out of there. I bolted for the door, fumbling with the knob in my panic. It finally gave way, and I burst into the hallway, nearly tripping over my own feet as I ran down the stairs. Outside, the night was cold and still. The little girl was gone, and the street was eerily silent. I didn't stop running until I was far away from the Carson's house, my heart pounding in my ears. What had I gotten myself into? The image of the little girl, the voice in the bedroom, the cold touch haunted me as I made my way home. I knew I had to find out more about the Carson's house and the secrets it held. As I walked away from the Carson's house, the night air helped to calm my racing heart. Questions swirled in my mind. Who was that little girl? And what had happened in that house? The next morning, I decided to do some research. The local library seemed to be a good place to start. The librarian, Mrs. Whitmore, was an elderly woman with kind eyes and a wealth of knowledge about the town's history. "Excuse me, Mrs. Whitmore," I said, approaching her desk. "Could you tell me anything about the Carson's house?" She looked up, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Why do you want to know about that old place?" "I was supposed to babysit there last night," I explained, "but something strange happened." Mrs. Whitmore sighed, then gestured for me to follow her. We walked to the back corner of the library, where old newspapers and records were kept. She pulled out a dusty file and handed it to me. "The Carson's house has a dark history," she said. "Many years ago, a little girl named Emily lived there. She disappeared one night and was never found. Some say her spirit still haunts the place." I shivered as I opened the file. Newspaper clippings and photographs painted a grim picture. Emily Carson, a bright-eyed girl with a wide smile, had vanished without a trace. The police had searched the house and the surrounding area, but no clues were ever found. Her parents had moved away shortly after, leaving the house abandoned. "Do you think Emily's ghost is still there?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Whitmore nodded solemnly. "Many believe so. There have been reports of strange noises, cold spots, and even sightings of a little girl. If you go back, be careful." Determined to get to the bottom of this mystery, I decided to return to the Carson's house that evening. As the sun set, casting a long shadow across the street, I found myself standing once again before the ominous house. Taking a deep breath, I stepped inside. The house was just as I remembered, dark, cold, and filled with an oppressive silence. I made my way upstairs, the floorboards creaking beneath my feet. This time, I was prepared. I brought a flashlight and a camera, hoping to capture any evidence of Emily's ghost. I entered the same bedroom where I had heard the voice. The air was frigid, and the shadows seemed to pulse with a life of their own. I set up my camera and began to speak softly. "Emily? Are you here?" For a moment, there was only silence. Then a faint whisper reached my ears. "Why did you come back?" "I'm here to help you," I said, my voice trembling. "I want to find out what happened to you." The temperature in the room dropped even further, and I could see my breath begin fogging in front of me. The shadows on the walls seemed to twist and writhe, forming the shape of a small girl. "You can't help me. the voice said, filled with sadness. No one can. But I can try, I insisted. Please tell me what happened. There was a long pause, and then the ghostly figure began to speak. She told me about the night she disappeared, about a strange man who had come to the house and taken her away. She described the fear and confusion she had felt, and the cold darkness that had followed. As she spoke, I felt a surge of determination. I promised her that I would find out the truth and bring her some peace. The shadows began to recede, and the room grew warmer. Emily's voice faded away, leaving me alone in the quiet house. I knew what I had to do. I had to uncover the identity of the man who had taken her. But where would I start? And how would I find the answers I needed? I knew I had to start with the police records. The library had old newspapers, but I needed more detailed information. The next morning, I went to the town's police station. Officer Daniels, a middle-aged man with a stern expression, was at the front desk. Hi, I'm looking for information on a cold case from years ago. The disappearance of Emily Carson, I said, trying to sound confident. The officer raised an eyebrow. That's a very old case. Why the sudden interest? I think her spirit might still be in the house, I confessed. I want to help her find peace. He stared at me for a moment before nodding. All right, follow me. He led me to a back room filled with filing cabinets. After some searching, he pulled out a thick file labeled Carson, Emily. He spread the contents on a table, and I saw photos, handwritten notes, and reports. The case went cold because we couldn't find any leads, Officer Daniels explained, but there were some suspects. I skimmed through the reports. One name kept coming up: Thomas Grady, a local handyman who had been seen near the Carson's house around the time of Emily's disappearance. He had a criminal record, but no concrete evidence had ever linked him to the crime. Do you know where Thomas Grady is now? I asked. He left town shortly after the investigation stalled, Daniels replied. But you might want to check with some of the older residents. They might remember something. With a new lead, I visited Mrs. Whitmore again. She remembered Thomas Grady and directed me to an old boarding house where he had stayed. The place was run by a gruff woman named Mrs. Handgrove. Thomas Grady? She repeated, and I asked about him. I remember him. Shady character. He left a lot of his stuff behind when he skipped town. Do you still have his things? I asked, my heart racing. Mrs. Handgrove nodded and led me to a dusty attic filled with old trunks and boxes. She pointed to a corner where a battered suitcase sat. That's his, she said. You can look through it, but I don't know what you'll find. I opened the suitcase and found old clothes, a few tools, and a worn notebook. Flipping through the pages, I saw notes about various odd jobs he had done around the town. But then, towards the end, I found something chilling. A sketch of the Carson's house and notes about its layout. I took the notebook to Officer Daniels. Look at this, I said, showing him the sketch and notes. He frowned as he examined it. This is enough to reopen the case. We need to find Grady. The next few days were a blur of activity. The police tracked down Thomas Grady to a small town a few hours away. When they brought him in for questioning, he initially denied any involvement, but the evidence was too compelling. Finally, Grady broke down and confessed. He had taken Emily that night, intending to ransom her, but things had gone wrong. She had tried to escape, and in a struggle, he had accidentally killed her. Panicking, he buried her body in a secluded area outside the town. With this confession, the police were able to locate Emily's remains. The town was in shock, but there was also a sense of relief that the mystery had been solved. I returned to the Carson's house one last time. The air felt different, lighter. In the same bedroom where I had first encountered Emily's spirit, I spoke softly. Emily, they found you. You can rest now. A sense of peace washed over me, and I knew she was finally at rest. But the Carson's house still held many secrets, and I wonder what other stories it had to tell.